The Patrol Boat River, or PBR, was a fast, maneuverable riverine vessel developed from a civilian pleasure craft and adapted specifically for combat on the dense river networks of Vietnam. These boats were among the most ambushed units in the Vietnam War, with 1 out of every 3 crew members wounded in action. Today, we will tell the incredible story of their actions, how these boats were made and armed, and what it was like to serve on one. Let's begin. With Vietnam often called the helicopter war, patrol boats did not get nearly as much attention, but had an equally terrifying and important role in the conflict. The war was not only fought in the jungles, 50% of the population lived along river systems, with over 2,000 rivers playing significant roles in daily life, serving as transportation routes and vital economic channels. These routes were difficult to control, and communist forces used the shallow, concealed rivers to smuggle essential war supplies in boats. Additionally, thousands of people depended on these rivers for their livelihoods, and the enemy skillfully used this to hide among the civilian population, even using them to lure PBRs into traps. This created a terrible combination of civilian casualties, mutual distrust and fear, including among US soldiers patrolling the riverboats, who never knew what they might encounter. Viet Cong guerrillas infiltrated deeply across South Vietnam in small units, using these river networks to terrorize the local population and even collecting taxes from civilians. The South Vietnamese river forces couldn't stop them from becoming so powerful, and the Americans soon realized they couldn't win the war as long as tons of war materials continued to pass undetected along these waterways. For this task, the US Army built 718 special boats to patrol the rivers, designed for so-called brown water to operate in shallow and unpredictable waters. The PBR played a key role in patrolling and securing Vietnam's waterways, cutting off Viet Cong supply routes and providing rapid support to Allied forces. These boats could navigate narrow, shallow rivers and operate in water only 18 inches deep thanks to their unique propulsion system. The Navy converted civilian boats into killing machines, and now you will see how. PBRs were made from fiberglass, making them lightweight, fast, and easy to repair. This material even allowed explosive ordnance, such as RPGs, to pass through the boat without detonating. Crew positions were protected with ballistic shields to guard against small arms fire, but boats were extremely vulnerable and relied on speed and firepower for protection. PBRs were about 30 feet long, with 2 main types, Mark I and Mark II. The second variant was slightly longer and faster, with some small improvements. In the muddy, plant-filled rivers, standard propellers would get entangled, so a water jet propulsion system was used. Powerful water jets shot streams of water from the back of the boat, allowing them to cut through rivers without getting stuck. This propulsion system also gave them exceptional speed and maneuverability. They could stop on a dime, make sharp turns, and even reverse quickly by adjusting the water jets. Top speed was around 30 knots, about 35 miles per hour. The riverbanks were lined with thick vegetation, which provided cover for enemy forces who launched sudden ambushes almost every day. PBR crews had to stay highly alert, especially on night patrols, and rely on their heavy firepower. Each boat was operated by a crew of 4, all trained to perform each other's jobs, if needed, since almost every engagement resulted in someone being wounded. The boat captain led the team, making strategic decisions and directing the crew. The helmsman steered the boat, while at the bow the forward gunner operated the twin 50 caliber machine guns in the front turret. The aft gunner covered the rear, manning another 50 caliber machine gun. These were their main tasks, but everyone had additional responsibilities on the boat. Weaponry. For such a small vessel, the PBR was heavily armed. As we said, there was a twin 50 caliber machine gun turret, at the back another single 50 covering the rear. A couple of light M60 machine guns were mounted on the sides for close-range combat, along with 1 Mark 18 grenade launcher. Some versions even had an 81mm mortar, a 20mm automatic cannon, or a flamethrower. Additionally, the crew had standard personal armament, such as M16 rifles, shotguns, pistols, and M79 grenade launchers. As you can see, the PBR could unleash a devastating response if ambushed. They operated in teams of at least 2 boats, with gunship helicopters on standby to provide additional support in trouble. They were equipped with a radar system, 2 radios, and sometimes Starlight night vision scopes for nighttime missions. However, their enormous firepower and exceptional maneuverability came at a cost. Their protection was minimal, which was their greatest weakness. The boats had ceramic armor shields for the machine guns and quarter-inch thick steel plates to protect the control cockpit. Crew members often added additional ballistic shields on their own, but that was it. River engagements were extremely frequent, and boat crews never knew what they would encounter. For example, on October 31st, 1966, 2 PBR crews engaged Viet Cong sampans, but the situation escalated into a horrific 3-hour battle. Backup and attack helicopters had to be called in, and eventually, the engagement cost the Viet Cong nearly 1,000 men, 50 vessels, and severely damaged major logistics operation. The life of a PBR crew member was grueling. They endured 18-hour patrols or longer, faced intense combat, and constantly risked ambush and sniper fire. These patrols were their daily routine, and they searched 200 to 300 sampans a day, or sometimes acted as decoys, provoking enemy fire so helicopters could locate and attack Viet Cong positions. Their missions typically launched from larger motherships or forward bases set up along the rivers, which served as temporary homes and supply stations. This allowed the PBRs to operate deep in hostile territory, far from the relative safety of major naval bases. The length of each patrol depended on the day's mission. They also participated in covert operations deep in enemy territory, inserting or extracting Navy SEALs or other special units on specific assignments. Crews would load supplies, ammunition, and necessary equipment for patrols. Their greatest fear was that their boat would break down and leave them stranded in enemy territory, which would mean a death sentence. Because of this, they meticulously maintained the boats, checking every detail before each mission. The dense vegetation and narrow rivers provided ideal cover for ambush teams, while a boat on open water was an easy target. The Viet Cong used simple fishing boats called sampans, similar to civilian boats. Since they didn't wear uniforms, it was nearly impossible to distinguish enemy combatants from regular civilians. Every boat or person along the river was a potential threat, and PBR crews had to stay alert for any signs of suspicious activity. They intercepted suspicious boats by firing warning shots above or around them, demanding that they stop for inspection. This was terrifying for both civilians and soldiers who lacked trust in each other. The crew would then search the boat and people on it, checking what they were carrying, looking for signs of smuggled weapons or anything that seemed like it could be meant for Viet Cong forces. Night patrols were even more frightening, as visibility was low and the risk of ambushes increased. PBR crews had to navigate the rivers in complete darkness, using minimal lighting to avoid detection. Viet Cong forces primarily moved at night, using the cover of darkness, and night patrols were often the most dangerous as they were more likely to encounter enemy movements. During the monsoon seasons, heavy rains would swell the rivers, flooding the jungle and making the waterways even more unpredictable. The damp environment made everything prone to rust and decay, so constant maintenance was necessary to keep the boats operational. Operation Game Warden. Operation Game Warden was a US Navy mission to stop the Viet Cong from using rivers as supply routes and to establish control over Vietnam's waterways. Task Force 116 was created specifically for this mission, organizing a fleet of PBRs to patrol the rivers. The Navy wanted these boats to push deeper into enemy territory, searching for Viet Cong forces and blocking their transport routes. PBRs were supported by helicopters, gunships, and even fixed-wing aircraft, which provided aerial reconnaissance and firepower when needed. Special operations units like Navy SEALs were also involved to support PBR crews, infiltrating enemy territory and conducting search and destroy operations. PBRs were quick to engage if a vessel didn't stop for inspection, which added to civilian casualties. However, during Operation Game Warden, PBR crews disrupted thousands of Viet Cong supply lines and captured large quantities of weapons and ammunition. They patrolled over 70,000 hours, engaged in hundreds of firefights, and played a significant role in the US Brown Water Navy efforts to control the river networks of Vietnam.